The saga continues to unfold with Russia and Crimea. Ron Paul weighs in, and some of Putin's words. Why isn't the American press even letting us hear what he has to say? It agitates me, and it's bad journalism. This is the voice of resistance.
Standing for truth in the four corners of America. Fighting for justice on the frontiers of the culture wars. And turning resistance into an art form. Randall Terry.
Giving you food for thought, if nothing else, on the situation with Crimea and the response of the West. Former presidential candidate Ron Paul, also former congressman, wrote an editorial for the USA Today. I'm actually going to read you a couple paragraphs because it's good. And it echoed some of the thoughts that I've expressed on this program, or I echoed his, whichever came first. But I again want to point something out. Venice wants to break away from Italy with a vote. The Italian federal government doesn't want that. Scotland wants to leave Great Britain. The English don't want that. Quebec wants to leave Canada. The Canadian government doesn't want that. And yet, we're not up in arms when they want to do what they're doing, but when Crimea says, we want to leave Ukraine, we scream it's a violation of international law. I've repeatedly asked the question on this program, what law? I want to read to you what Ron Paul said about some of these things. He said, what's the big deal? Opponents of the Crimea vote like to point to the illegality of the referendum, but self-determination is a centerpiece of international law. Article 1 of the United Nations Charter points out clearly that the purpose of the UN is to, quote, develop friendly relations among nations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples. So when the UN recognized Kosovo after the breakup of Yugoslavia, this is what they referred to. And there was a lot of bloodshed there. You have to remember Serbia and US involvement and NATO involvement. It was bad. I continue. Why does the US care which flag will be hoisted on a small piece of land thousands of miles away? Critics point to the Russian occupation of Crimea as evidence that no fair vote could have taken place. Where were these people when an election held in an Iraq occupied by US troops was called a triumph of democracy? That's some serious irony. Perhaps the US officials who supported the unconstitutional overthrow of Ukraine's government should refocus their energies on learning our own constitution, which does not allow the US government to overthrow governments overseas or send $1 billion to bail out Ukraine and its international creditors. From Ron Paul, something he wrote for the USA Today. Let me point out a couple of things. Number one, I think that as this really begins to shake down, Russia is clearly going to keep Crimea. The end. And sadly, there have been 2 lives lost as of this taping, but thankfully, for the most part, the removal of Ukrainian troops, the seizure of various bases has happened with goodwill and without bloodshed. And I've been watching the film clips. I think what this is about largely has to do with NATO's obligations to new member states. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, which was designed and created to stand against Russia, well, they obligated us to protect Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, okay? The Baltic states. And you see that map, and you see they border Russia, and this happened at a time when Russia was fairly weak after the breakup of the Soviet Union, and the allies of NATO welcomed these states into NATO, thereby obligating NATO to use military force should any of these member states be threatened by Russia, because that is the principle of NATO. An attack on one member of NATO results in a counterattack from all members of NATO. So I think that when these nations were received into NATO, no one thought that Russia would have a rebound in their 1,000-year-old concept of greatness, of empire. And it's to our discredit that we don't know history. Our empire, and let's face it, we do have an empire, only goes back to the end of World War II. The British Empire was for hundreds of years. Russia had an empire for hundreds of years. China had an empire for hundreds of years. And these other nations, China and Russia specifically, they are not content to live in a world where U.S. foreign policy drives the agenda for everyone. I'll read to you some of the quotes from Putin's speech and have a comment or two on that in his perspective and the failure of American media. It really is upsetting to me. This is the voice of resistance.
You have two choices. I mean, you can try to raise your children by design, or you will raise them by default. There are no perfect parents. We're going to get it wrong sometimes. If we have a plan, we've got a better chance of getting it right in the long run.
There is something deep within the heart of every human being that longs for parental acceptance and approval. When does a boy become a man?
Get a group of guys around and ask them that question.
I don't think there's a certain age. Some men stay boys their whole life.
I would say, 16, 18 years old.
Wow, that's a good question.
When they get bar mitzvah.
Well, I think when he has a child. So I just became at 56, 56 years old.
Without the power of the Holy Spirit changing us and giving us power over our sin, we can't hope to be the dads that our kids need us to be.
My country, right or wrong? I'm not sure that that's a healthy definition of patriotism. Right or wrong matters. God judges nations based upon right and wrong, good and evil. Let me read to you a couple of excerpts from Putin's speech that he gave after the Crimean vote. But before I do, let me say this. It has been appalling to me, and I mean appalling, to see how little honorable coverage has come out of Putin's speech, the arguments that the Russians are making. It's bizarre. I had to look for hours, it felt like hours, just to find a translation of Putin's speech. The New York Times put a link to the video of his speech after Crimea seceded, and they didn't give a translation. I mean, these are supposed to be journalists that actually cover the news. Instead, they parrot the State Department line that this is a violation of international law, that they didn't have a free election. I'm not sure what planet they're on. Okay? There was an election, people, and Iraq had an election while occupied by U.S. forces. Afghanistan had an election while occupied by U.S. forces. So I just don't get it. I really don't. And let me read this to you. Let me read something that Putin said. He said, "Our Western partners, headed by the United States, prefer not to be guided by international law in their practical policies, but by the rule of the gun. They have come to believe in their exceptionalism and their sense of being the chosen ones, that they can decide the destinies of the world, that it is only them who can be right." This shows some pretty good insight on his part about manifest destiny or exceptionalism, and I wish that the narrative was a little bit different. I actually wish that America was still the city on the hill. We used to be a beacon of hope to people. We had real religious liberty. We defended life. Now we've killed over 55 million babies. Our government is forcing businesses to fund chemicals that murder babies. Our courts are overthrowing the rule of law and forcing the militant homosexual agenda on us. The U.S. is a massive exporter of pornography. The U.S. tax money being used to fund Planned Parenthood and killing babies abroad, exporting child killing. In many narratives, we've become the villain. And when it comes to Islam, our foreign policy borders on insanity. Literally. Not wanting to just say this is the historical reality, that Islam is a de facto, not just a religion, but a military blueprint for the subjugation of the earth. So I wish it was a neat little package, that the U.S. was the good guys and Russia was the bad guys. But it just ain't so. My mind goes back to the scriptures, different prophets that warned Israel and Judah that they would be destroyed. And some of the prophets complained, in so many words, that God was going to use a wicked nation to bring judgment on them. I mean, think of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar. They were a wicked people, just were. But God used them to chasten Judah. And I'm no friend of Russia. They don't have full freedom of speech, although they have some. They don't have full democracy, although they have elected this man. They have elected their leaders. It's not the Soviet Union anymore. And Putin owned that in his speech. That this is, people were elected here. We are elected leaders just like the West has them. Russia kills their babies like America kills her babies. Russia has fought hard against Islamic terrorism and has had a lot more Islamic terrorist attacks on their own soil than we have had on ours. And Russia won't allow the militant homosexuals to recruit kids into their lifestyle. It's messy, people. And the concept, my nation, right or wrong, this is our nation, and we should defend America. But when America is not correct, we have to have the integrity and the courage to say so. Not be just blind lemmings that fly the flag and say no matter what, we're right. No, because there's a God in heaven. He sees, He hears, He judges men and nations. God have mercy on us. This is the voice of resistance. Do you want to have knowledge, wisdom, discernment? If so, you have to read good books on theology, history, books that look at the lives of great men and women. So to help you to become a more effective Christian, a better witness for truth, somebody who can engage in productive conversation that exhorts and edifies those that you speak with, we're going to do something crazy. We're offering you these 7 books for a gift of any size. You just pay for the shipping and handling, and then give whatever gift that you can, and we will send them to you. But just to make it a little bit more crazy, I will send you a second copy of my 3 books, autographed. You can give them as a gift to your pastor or to a family member and help extend truth and justice in the world. This is while supplies last. I encourage you to go to the website that you see on the screen if you can find it. if you want to read Putin's speech that he made after Crimea voted to secede from Ukraine and to become a part of the Russian Federation. And again, I renew my complaint with sloppy journalists in America who did not have the integrity to simply post a link. I mean, good grief. If the man is making a compelling argument, at least let people hear it. Because I guarantee you the leaders of America and the leaders of Europe and the leaders of the European Union, the leaders of NATO have read this speech. And Putin, as much as none of us may like it, made some very compelling arguments. Let me show you one more and then show you where he's wrong. He said, thus we see that the overwhelming majority of people in Crimea and the absolute majority of the Russian Federation's people support the reunification of the Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol with Russia. Now this is a matter for Russia's own political decision, and any decision here can be based only on the people's will, because the people is the ultimate source of all authority. That's actually not true, but it's clever that he did it. That's French Revolution nonsense, okay? The ultimate source of authority is God, his law, not the voice of the people. That's a French Revolution lie, which ended in massive bloodshed. But let me tell you something else that I think is at play here. And we're going to have to watch this as the years unfold. Russia has massive oil reserves and is the major supplier of gas, all right, including heating gas, for natural gas, for all of Europe, all right? Again, I show you this map. Look at these pipelines. Look at who is getting their gas from Russia. So quite literally, Russia has Europe over a barrel. And China and Russia are seeing fairly eye to eye on the situation with Crimea. China and Russia resent that all oil is traded in dollars by international treaty. They resent the power of the dollar on the world stage. And I would not be a bit surprised if the backstory or some of the undercurrents here have to do with currency, with money. And Putin made some comment the other day, almost offhandedly, about that they would deal with currency issues as they saw fit. And the simple matter is that America deals with fiat money, all right? America deals with fiat money, money created out of thin air, all right? It's called a hard currency, but it's really not. Russia's ruble is considered weak, and it was really an act of kindness to let Russia into the G7, thereby making it the G8, the group of 8, the economic powers of the earth, some of them. But if Russia and China and maybe some other one or two oil-producing nations that have enormous political and economic clout, if they say, we're going to create a new currency to buy and sell oil, buy and sell silver and gold, the fiat American dollar, which is in part propped up internationally because of oil, because all oil is traded in dollars, we could see a disastrous devaluation of the dollar. So we don't know what the future holds. God knows. And we also know that God will change his mind, according to Jeremiah 18. If we'll repent and do what's right, God will bless us. If we forsake him and do what's wrong, he'll bring chastening on us. We don't know what the future holds, but I can easily predict this. On the world stage, Russia and China and Iran are going to be a part of that equation. And sadly, because of our departing from the ways of God and the ways of justice and righteousness, and because of our fear in not dealing with nuclear-armed Islamic states, there could be some pretty tragic and horrific days in the future. This is the voice of resistance. Do you want to get America out of the hands of wicked and unjust men and women who are destroying the republic before our eyes, and put leadership back into the hands of righteous men and women so that we don't die as a nation? Well, you're talking about social revolution, and there are rules in social revolution. We can look at the victorious social revolutions of the past, such as the end of slavery, the end of child labor, women's voting rights, the end of segregation, and so much more, and learn from their victories. Look at their actions, their images, their rhetoric, their sacrifices, and their final fruit. We will send you this series that originally cost $129, 7 books for students, 1 teacher's guide, if you'll give a gift of any size and just pay for shipping and handling. Take advantage of it today. It is ironic that Edward Snowden has sought and found indefinite refuge in Russia. He recently addressed a crowd in Canada via a robot. He was somewhere hiding out and was controlling the robot at a long distance and was speaking to the crowd. And he said that he did have other state secrets that he intended to release, and has asserted that they will not jeopardize national security. I think this has to really irk our government, that Putin is behaving the way he's doing regarding Crimea and Ukraine, and they have Snowden. And by the way, Putin has said, and this remains to be seen, that they do not want to have an intervention in Ukraine, that he wants Ukraine to be a free people. He could be lying, and we'll see. But Ukraine has already said, we don't want to be a member of NATO. So that means that they're looking to the east instead of to the west. We'll see what happens. And we'll keep following the Edward Snowden saga. Moving quickly to the missing airplane. Obviously, this is a tragedy. It is possible that the crew and the people are still alive. It looks very clearly now like the pilots themselves took the plane. And as one nation after another comes forward with clearer details, it looks like this was an inside job. We will keep you posted on it, and it looks like it was a Muslim inside job. Once again, displaying what devout Muslim men look like in their geopolitics and in their pursuit of terrorism to affect public policy. One of the staff and I were talking before the show about somebody he saw on Fox or something that said, well, we know that terrorism is so that the terrorists can say, look, here I am. No, that would make Beyonce a terrorist or some of these other people. No. What they want is to get everyone's attention. Terrorism is not for the dead. Terrorism is for the living. All right? Terrorism is to affect public policy, to put fear in the hearts of populations so that their government's policy is changed, like Spain leaving the coalition to fight against Al-Qaeda. Okay? Anyway, I want to encourage you to go to our website and read. Read. If you're interested in historic Islam, I have 3 or 4 lengthy papers online that you can download and read for free. They are a part of my work for my master's degree in international terrorism. So they read a little bit dry. I'll let you know, there's no exclamation marks. If you want to understand the history of social revolution, we have a television series online. You can have all of it for free. You can access all of it. The point of this is for us to help equip you to become a voice for righteousness and a force for good, for truth, and for justice in the world. But in order for that to happen, you have to be equipped. So we're offering all of that to you. at no charge. God bless you. Enjoy it. This is the voice of resistance.